Okay, wow. Some of you sent in articles about this Eric Adams thing in New York City, and I gotta say, it's pretty wild. I mean, we're diving deep into the Justice Department dropping all those corruption charges, but this whole thing just feels way bigger. Like it goes way beyond just New York. It's about the integrity of our entire justice system, and that's something that impacts all of us, right?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. This case has become a total lightning rod for concerns about political influence.
Hmm.
And yeah, the potential fallout from this could be huge.
Okay, so let's back up for a second and like start from the beginning. What were the initial accusations against Mayor Adams, and why were they such a big deal in the first place?
So back in September, a grand jury indicted Adams on charges of bribery, wire fraud, conspiracy, even soliciting campaign contributions from foreign nationals. I mean, this isn't just like some parking ticket. These are accusations that go to the very heart of ethical conduct, especially for someone in public office.
Okay, so help me understand this. Like, what does that actually mean in plain English? What kind of evidence were they looking at?
Well, the indictment mentions over $100,000 in free plane tickets, luxury hotel stays, all provided by wealthy Turkish nationals, and at least one government official. It's some pretty serious stuff.
Wow. It's hard to square that with Adams completely denying any wrongdoing. Like, he's saying this is all just political. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a common defense in cases like this, for sure, and we see it all the time. However, the evidence presented in the indictment does appear to be pretty substantial. Now, that being said, the sudden intervention by the Justice Department throws a whole other wrench into the works.
Right. It's not every day that an attorney general just comes in and drops charges like that, is it?
No, you're right. It is highly unusual. The new Attorney General Pam Bondi and her deputy Emil Bove ordered the charges against Adams dropped just last month. And what makes this really interesting is that Bove actually have a history as a former member of Trump's personal legal team.
Hold on. So the guy who used to work for Trump is now the one making decisions about whether or not to prosecute a mayor who Trump has publicly defended. That
Like,
seems like a massive red flag.
yeah, it definitely raises questions about the motivations here, especially when you look at the DOJ's reasoning for dropping the charges. They've publicly said it was due to Adams's potential to help out with immigration and crime. But a lot of people are saying that that totally ignores how serious the evidence against him is.
So they're basically saying Adams is too useful to prosecute, regardless of whether he actually did anything wrong.
That's one way to look at it. And it gets even more suspicious because Bub added that the DOJ could just renew the investigation later on.
Which makes you wonder if there's some kind of leverage situation going on.
Okay, this is already starting to feel like a political thriller or something. And then on top of all of that, we have Danielle Sassoon resigning. She was the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, right? Yeah, that's right. And her resignation is really important for a couple of reasons. First, she's known for being like a hardcore conservative. So the fact that she's opposing actions taken by a Trump-led DOJ is pretty significant. But even more importantly, she didn't just quietly resign. She released this letter, this explosive letter outlining her reasoning, and she did not hold back.
Okay, so what was so explosive about it? What did she actually say?
Well, one of the biggest bombshells was her accusing Adams' lawyers of basically implying a quid pro quo. They suggested that if the indictment was dropped, Adams would help out with the DOJ's enforcement priorities, specifically when it came to immigration.
So basically drop the charges and he'll help you crack down on immigration. Is that even legal?
Well, it definitely raises some serious ethical concerns, to say the least. But then there's another part of Sassoon's letter that's even crazier. She wrote that she was basically told Adams should be given leniency for federal crimes just because of his position, and because he could use that position to help out with the administration's goals.
Wow. So it's not even about whether or not he's guilty. It's about whether he's useful to them.
That's exactly it. It makes you worry that there's like a two-tiered system of justice going on, where powerful people can just escape accountability based on politics.
I can totally see why her resignation was such a big deal. And if I'm remembering correctly, she wasn't the only one to walk away, right?
Yeah.
There were other
Wow.
people who resigned from the DOJ around the same time, too.
You're absolutely right. John Keller, who was the acting head of the Public Integrity Section, Kevin Driscoll, the acting head of the Criminal Division, and at least 3 more prosecutors also decided to quit in response to this whole mess.
Wow. So what does that wave of departures tell us about what's going on inside the DOJ right now?
It's a sign of serious unease, a real crisis of conscience within the department. A lot of people are comparing this to the Saturday Night Massacre during Watergate. That was a dark time when people who refused to go along with what they saw as an abuse of power were systematically removed.
That's a scary comparison. If we're seeing echoes of Watergate here, What does that say about the state of our justice system today?
You know, it really highlights how fragile an independent judiciary can be. And if public trust in the justice system erodes, it undermines the very foundation of our democracy.
So we've got a potentially corrupt mayor, a justice department that seems willing to bend the rules, and a mass exodus of principled prosecutors.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? What happens next in this story?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, the DOJ dismissing the charges isn't necessarily the end of it. A judge still has to sign off on that decision. And with all the controversy surrounding this case, it's hard to imagine it happening without some serious pushback.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious about how Trump and Adams have reacted to all of this. I know Trump has hinted at a possible pardon for Adams in the past, and he's been pretty vocal about criticizing how Adams has been treated.
It is interesting, isn't it? I mean, despite all that Trump is denying any involvement now, it's almost like a classic example of a non-denial denial.
Right. And what about Adams? How has he responded to the resignations and the accusations of political meddling?
Well, he came out and praised Bondi publicly, and he even made a kind of a snarky comment after the resignations. He said, "I'm Eric Adams, and I approve this message."
Oh, wow. It almost sounds like he's enjoying the controversy, but it also feels calculated, like he's trying to shift attention away from the serious accusations.
Yeah, his response definitely adds another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
Mm.
It makes you wonder about what his relationship with the administration is really like,
Mm.
and how much that relationship might be influencing decisions at the DOJ.
This is all just so unsettling. It paints this picture of justice being applied unevenly, where powerful people can operate above the law. It feels like this case has become a focal point for that fear.
I agree. It's not just about this one mayor or this one administration. What's at stake here are the core principles of fairness and impartiality that our whole legal system is built on. When those principles are seen as eroding, it impacts everyone. It creates an environment where power and influence can overshadow justice and accountability.
You mentioned earlier that the Southern District of New York, where this case started, is a pretty big deal. Can you explain why that is? I have to admit, I'm not really up on all the intricacies of the court system.
Oh yeah, a lot of people aren't. It can definitely be confusing. The Southern District of New York is known for handling some of the most high-profile and complex cases in the country. They have a reputation for being really tough on corruption, especially when it comes to public officials. So the fact that this case started there makes the whole situation even more significant.
I see. So it's not just any court. It's a court with a history of holding powerful people accountable. And to see the Justice Department try to shut it all down, it feels like they're setting a dangerous precedent.
Yeah, it raises a lot of questions about prosecutorial discretion.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me. What exactly is prosecutorial discretion, and why are people so worried about it in this case?
Prosecutorial discretion basically means that prosecutors have the power to decide which cases to go after and how to go after them. It gives the justice system some flexibility, but it also requires a lot of trust. The concern here is that that discretion might be used for political gain.
So it's like a prosecutor having the ability to choose their battles. But what's stopping them from abusing that power?
That's the core of the issue. The system depends heavily on the integrity and ethical judgment of the people in those prosecutorial roles. And when things like this happen, it erodes public trust in the entire system.
It makes you wonder how all of this will affect future administrations and future prosecutions. I mean, if this kind of political interference becomes normal, what does that mean for the average person? What does it mean for someone like you involved in local politics?
That's a really important question, and it's something we all need to be thinking about. This case could set a dangerous precedent. If people start to believe that justice can be manipulated for political reasons, it undermines the foundation of our democracy.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the potential downsides here. But are there any potential positive outcomes that could come from this? Could this be a catalyst for reform or a renewed focus on judicial independence?
It's definitely possible. Sometimes it takes a scandal or a crisis to expose flaws in the system and force us to confront uncomfortable truths.
Yeah, it's like that saying, sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. But those broken eggs represent real people and real consequences.
That's a really important point. While we can hope for some positive change to come out of this, we can't ignore the damage that's already been done. The resignations of those prosecutors are a reminder of the personal costs involved when the integrity of our institutions is compromised.
Yeah, their actions definitely speak louder than words. They were willing to sacrifice their careers to stand up for what they believed in. It's a powerful reminder that we all have a responsibility to uphold the principles of justice and accountability.
I think that's a great transition to something we haven't talked about yet, the role of the public in all of this. It's easy to feel powerless when you see these big scandals happening. But we as citizens have more power than we realize.
Okay, I'm all ears. What can we actually do? We're not all lawyers or politicians. How can everyday people make a difference in a situation like this?
Well, awareness is a powerful tool. Cases like this often get lost in the constant news cycle. But by educating ourselves and having informed discussions, we can help keep these issues in the public eye and demand answers from our elected officials.
Yeah, knowledge is power, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of knowledge, this feels like a good time to remind everyone about those articles you all sent in. They really go into detail about all the legal arguments, the political context, and the bigger implications of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's definitely worth taking the time to really dig into those sources and form your own opinions. This is a complicated issue with no easy answers, but I think by understanding all the nuances and engaging in thoughtful debate, we can all contribute to a more informed and engaged citizenry.
Absolutely.
It's like you said earlier, this case goes way beyond just one mayor or one city. It's about the health of our democracy as a whole, and that's something that affects all of us. But it can feel so overwhelming sometimes, like one person can't really make a difference.
I get that feeling. But remember, change often starts at the local level. I mean, this situation with Adams and the DOJ might seem far removed from your daily life. But think about it. Have you ever noticed anything similar happening in your own local government? Have you ever seen decisions being made that seem to prioritize political convenience over fairness or accountability?
That's a really good point. It makes you realize that these big national scandals often have smaller versions happening right in our own backyards. It's like a fractal pattern, repeating itself at different scales.
Exactly. And that's where we as citizens can really step up and make a difference by paying attention to what's going on in our communities, by asking questions, and by holding our local officials accountable. We can help make sure that those principles of justice and fairness are upheld at every level.
That reminds me of something my grandfather used to say. He was a retired judge. And he always talked about how important an informed citizenry is. He believed that a democracy could only function properly when its citizens were actively engaged and informed about the issues that affect their lives.
He sounds like a wise man. An apathetic public is a vulnerable public.
Yeah.
When we disengage from the political process, we create a void that can be easily filled by people who want to exploit the system for their own personal gain.
So in a way, staying informed and engaged is a form of self-defense. It's about protecting our democracy and making sure it works for everybody, not just a select few. But what does that actually look like in practice? What are some concrete things that we can do as everyday citizens?
Well, one of the easiest and most effective things you can do is stay informed about what's happening in your local government. Attend city council meetings. Read local news articles. Follow your elected officials on social media.
Yeah. Social media can be a really powerful tool for holding people accountable these days.
It really can. And don't be afraid to reach out to your representatives directly. Send emails. Make phone calls. Go to town hall meetings. Let them know that you're paying attention and that you care about these issues.
It's all about making our voices heard, reminding those in power that they ultimately answer to us.
Exactly. And remember, you don't need to be a lawyer or a politician to make a difference. Just showing up, asking questions, expressing your concerns. All of that can have a ripple effect.
It's like that saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
That's a good one. Silence is often seen as consent. When we stay silent in the face of injustice, we're basically allowing it to continue.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I have one final question for you. If there's one key takeaway that you want our listeners to remember from this whole conversation, what would it be?
That's a tough one. I think the most important thing to remember is that the integrity of our justice system isn't guaranteed. It's something that we have to actively protect and fight for. And that responsibility lies with all of us, not just those in power. By staying informed, holding our leaders accountable, and demanding transparency, we can help make sure that justice is served fairly and impartially for everyone.
That's a really powerful message, and it definitely resonates with everything we've talked about today. This whole case, with all its twists and turns and ethical dilemmas, really highlights how fragile our institutions are and how important our role as citizens is in keeping them strong.
It shows us that democracy isn't a spectator sport. It requires active participation, critical thinking, and a willingness to speak truth to power.
So to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep learning about this story. Look into the Saturday Night Massacre. Research prosecutorial discretion, and think about what a truly independent Justice Department would look like to you. This case is just one small part of a much larger story about the ongoing struggle to uphold the rule of law, especially in a world where power and politics often clash.
And remember, your voice matters. Don't be afraid to speak up. Ask questions. Demand better from the people who represent you. The future of our democracy depends on it.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.